Owls in the Family. Chapter 8. The banks of the Saskatchewan River were very steep where the river ran through the prairie to the south of Saskatoon, and about 2 miles downstream from the city was a perfect place for digging caves. Bruce and Murray and I had our summer headquarters down there in an old cave some hobos had dug a long time ago. They had fixed it up with logs and pieces of wood so it wouldn't collapse. You have to be careful of caves because if they don't have good strong logs to hold up the roof, the whole thing can fall down and kill you. This was a good cave we had, though. My dad had even come there and looked it over to make sure it was safe for us. It had a door made of a piece of tin roofing, and there was a smokestack going up through the ceiling. Inside was a sort of bench where you could lie down, and we had 2 butter crates for chairs. We put dry hay down on the floor for a carpet, and under the hay there was a secret hole where we could hide anything that was specially valuable. The river ran only a hop, skip, and a jump from the door of the cave. There was a big sandbar close by which made a backwater where the current was slow enough for swimming. Standing right beside the swimming hole was the biggest cottonwood tree in the whole of Saskatchewan. One of its branches stuck straight out over the water, and there were old marks on it where a rope had cut into the bark. An Indian who was being chased by the Mounties a long time ago was supposed to have hanged himself on that branch so the Mounties wouldn't catch him alive. We used to go to our cave a couple times a week during the summer holidays, and usually we took the owls along. Wool had learned how to ride on the handlebars of my bicycle, but Weeps couldn't keep his balance there, so we built a kind of box for him and tied it to a carrier behind the seat. Mutt and Rex used to come too, chasing cows whenever they got a chance or racing away across the prairie after jackrabbits. We would bike out to the end of 3rd Avenue and then along an old Indian trail that ran along the top of the riverbank. When we got close to the cave, we would hide our bikes in the willows and then climb down the bank and follow a secret path. There were some pretty tough kids in Saskatoon, and we didn't want them to find our cave if we could help it. Wool loved those trips. All the way out he would bounce up and down on the handlebars, hooting to himself with excitement, or hooting out insults at any passing dog. When we came to the place where we hid the bikes, he would fly up into the poplars and follow us through the tops of the trees. He usually stayed pretty close, though, because if he didn't, some crows would be sure to spot him, and then they would call up all the other crows for miles around and try to mob him. When that happened, he would come zooming down to the cave and bang on the door with his beak until we let him in. He wasn't afraid of the crows. It was just that he couldn't fight back when they tormented him. As for Weeps, he usually stayed right in the cave where he felt safe. One summer afternoon, when we were at the cave, we decided to go for a swim. The 3 of us shucked off our clothes and raced for the sandbar, hollering at each other, "Last one in's a Dutchman!" In half a minute we were in the water, splashing around and rolling in the slippery black mud along the edge of the sandbar. It was great stuff to fight with. Nice and soft and slithery, it packed into mushy mud balls that made a wonderful splash when they hit something. Whenever we went swimming, Wool would come along and find a perch in the hanging tree where he could watch the fun. He would get out on the big limb that hung over the water, and the more fuss and noise we made, the more excited he became. He would walk back and forth along the limb, hoo-hooing and ruffling his feathers, and you could tell he felt he was missing out on the fun. This particular day he couldn't stand it any longer, so he came down out of the tree and waddled right to the river's edge. We were skylarking on the sandbar when I saw him, so I gave him a yell. "Hey, Wool! Come on there, Wool, old owl! Come on out here!" Of course, I thought he would fly across the strip of open water and light on the dry sand where we were playing. But I forgot Wool had never had any experience with water before except in his drinking bowl at home. He got his experience in a hurry. Instead of spreading his wings, he lifted up one foot very deliberately and started to walk across the water toward us. It didn't take him long to find out he couldn't do it. There was an almighty splash, and spray flew every which way. By the time we raced across and fished him out, he was half drowned, and about the sickest looking bird you ever saw. His feathers were plastered down until he looked as skinny as a plucked chicken. The slimy black mud hadn't improved his looks much either. I carried him ashore, but he didn't thank me for it. His feelings were hurt worse than he was, and after he had shaken most of the water out of his feathers, he went glumping off through the woods toward home on foot. He was too wet to fly, without a backward glance. Toward the middle of July, Bruce and I got permission from our parents to spend a night in the cave. Murray couldn't come because his mother wouldn't let him. We took Wool and Weeps with us, and of course we had both dogs. In the afternoon we went for a hike over the prairie looking for birds. Mutt, who was running ahead of us, flushed a prairie chicken off of her nest. There were 10 eggs in the nest, and they were just hatching out. We sat down beside the nest and watched. In an hour's time, 7 of the little chickens had hatched before our eyes. It was pretty exciting to see, and Wool seemed just as curious about it as we were. Then, all of a sudden, 3 of the newly hatched little birds slipped out of the nest and scuttled straight for Wool. Before he could move, they were underneath him, crowding against his big feet and peeping happily. I guess they thought he was their mother, because they hadn't seen their real mother yet. Wool was so surprised he didn't know what to do. He kept lifting up one foot and then the other to shake off the little ones. When the other 4 babies joined the first 3, Wool began to get nervous. But finally he seemed to resign himself to being a mother, and he fluffed his feathers out and lowered himself gently to the ground. Bruce and